The gun holstered at Owen Hart's hip hadn't been drawn in anger for 3 years, but his hand still drifted toward it every time a door opened too quickly, every time footsteps approached from behind, every time the wind carried voices he couldn't quite make out across the dusty streets of Canon City, Colorado. It was the autumn of 1874, and Owen had spent the last decade learning that survival meant solitude, and tomorrow always arrived empty of promises. The cattle drive had ended 2 weeks prior, depositing him back in this mountain-ringed town, where he owned nothing but a room above the livery stable and the clothes on his back. At 32 years old, he possessed the weathered hands of a man who had worked hard his entire life and the distant eyes of someone who had stopped expecting comfort from the world. His dark hair showed threads of premature gray at the temples, and his face bore the permanent tan of someone who lived beneath the sun more than beneath any roof. Owen walked through the afternoon heat toward the general store, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The main street of Canon City stretched before him, flanked by wooden buildings that seemed to lean into each other like tired old men. The Arkansas River ran nearby, its sound a constant whisper beneath the everyday noises of town life. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already touched with early snow that wouldn't reach the valley floor for another month or two. The general store's door stood propped open to catch any passing breeze, and Owen stepped inside to the familiar smell of coffee beans, tobacco, and dry goods. Martha Simmons, who had run the place since her husband died of pneumonia 5 winters back, glanced up from her counter and nodded. "Owen, need supplies. Just coffee and tobacco, maybe some beans if you have any that aren't too old." Martha turned to gather his items, and Owen's attention drifted to the small cluster of people at the far end of the store. 2 women stood examining bolts of fabric, their dresses marking them as recent arrivals from somewhere east. One was older, perhaps 50, with gray streaks through brown hair pulled back in a severe bun. The other was younger, and something about the way she held herself made Owen look twice. She couldn't have been more than 25, with auburn hair that caught the light streaming through the window and turned it copper. Her dress was well made but showed signs of hard travel, and her hands moved over the fabric with the careful assessment of someone who knew quality from pretense. But it was her face that held his attention longer than he intended. There was something in her expression, a combination of determination and barely concealed worry, that reminded him of a bird with an injured wing trying to convince the world it could still fly. She glanced up suddenly, catching him watching, and for a moment their eyes met. Hers were green, the color of new leaves in spring, and they widened slightly before she looked away. Owen felt heat rise in his face and turned back to Martha, annoyed at himself for staring. "That is $4 even," Martha said, placing his wrapped parcels on the counter. Owen paid and gathered his supplies, intending to leave quickly and forget about green eyes and copper hair. But as he reached the door, the older woman's voice carried clearly across the store. "We need somewhere to stay for at least 2 months, possibly longer. Do you have boarding houses that accept women without male relations?" Martha's hesitation was audible. "Well, there is Mrs. Patterson's place on 3rd Street, but she is pretty particular about her guests. Most places want references or a husband to vouch." "I have references," the younger woman said, and her voice held a quality that made Owen pause despite himself. It was educated, refined even, but threaded with steel underneath. "My name is Delilah Keene, and this is my aunt, Mrs. Catherine Winters. We have traveled from Philadelphia, and we have both funds and respectability." "I am not questioning your respectability, miss," Martha said carefully. It is just that Canon City is not accustomed to ladies traveling alone. People talk, and Mrs. Patterson cares a great deal about what people say. Owen should have left. He had no business involving himself in the troubles of strangers, especially female strangers who represented the kind of complication he had spent years avoiding. But something in Delilah Keene's voice when she thanked Martha and turned away, something defeated beneath the steel, made him speak before his better judgment could stop him. The Riverside Hotel takes respectable guests without asking too many questions, he heard himself say. Mrs. Chen runs it fair and does not gossip. All four women turned to look at him. Martha's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline, and the aunt regarded him with frank suspicion. But Delilah Keene's expression showed only relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "That is very kind. Could you direct us there? It is 2 streets north near the river. You cannot miss it. White building with green shutters." She smiled, and it transformed her entire face from pretty to something that made Owen's chest feel tight. "Thank you very much, Mr. Hart. Owen Hart." "Mr. Hart, I appreciate your help." He nodded, touched the brim of his hat in an automatic gesture of politeness his mother had beaten into him as a boy, and left the store before he could say anything else foolish. The afternoon had grown hotter, and he walked back toward the livery with his supplies, trying to forget the encounter and failing completely. That evening, Owen sat on the narrow porch outside his room, smoking and watching the sun paint the mountains gold and red as it descended. The sounds of Canon City settling in for the night drifted up from below. Horses moving in their stalls, dogs barking in the distance, the faint music from the saloon 3 blocks over. He had spent countless evenings exactly like this, alone with his thoughts and his tobacco, content in his solitude because contentment required nothing from him. But tonight his mind kept returning to the general store, to green eyes and a voice that held determination, despite obvious trouble. He wondered what had brought 2 women alone from Philadelphia to a rough mining and ranching town in Colorado territory. Nothing good, most likely. People did not travel that far without powerful reasons, and powerful reasons usually meant running from something or running towards something equally dangerous. None of his business, Owen reminded himself. He had learned long ago that other people's problems had a way of becoming your own if you let them close enough. Better to keep his distance, mind his own affairs, and let tomorrow arrive without the complications that other people inevitably brought. He was still telling himself that 3 days later when he saw Delilah Keene again, this time in circumstances that made keeping his distance considerably more difficult. Owen had taken a job helping Samuel Garrett, who owned a small ranch east of town, move some cattle to winter pasture. It was honest work that paid decent money, and it kept him busy enough that he had almost succeeded in putting the encounter at the general store out of his mind. Almost, but not quite, because he still found himself scanning faces on the street whenever he came into town and feeling disappointed when none of them had auburn hair. He was riding back to Canon City late in the afternoon, his horse tired, and his own muscles aching from a long day in the saddle, when he spotted the small figure walking alone on the road ahead. Even from a distance, he recognized the set of her shoulders and the way she moved, as if every step required conscious effort to maintain dignity despite exhaustion. As he drew closer, Delilah heard his approach and turned, one hand rising to shade her eyes against the slanting sunlight. Recognition crossed her face, followed immediately by what looked like embarrassment. "Mr. Hart," she said as he reined his horse to a stop beside her. "Miss Keene, you are a fair distance from town to be walking alone. I had business at the Patterson ranch. They have a small library, and Mrs. Patterson kindly allowed me to borrow some books." She indicated a cloth bag slung over her shoulder. "I did not realize the walk would take quite so long." Owen glanced at the sky. They had perhaps an hour of good light left, and the road between here and Canon City was generally safe, but generally was not the same as certainly. "Let me give you a ride back to town." I could not impose. "It is not an imposition. My horse can carry two, and it will be dark soon." She hesitated, and he could see her weighing pride against practicality. Practicality won. "Thank you. That is very kind." Owen dismounted and offered his hand to help her up. She placed her palm in his, and even through his work-roughened skin he felt the warmth of her touch. He swung up behind her, trying to ignore how the arrangement placed her within the circle of his arms and how she smelled faintly of lavender and book dust. "Hold on," he said, and urged his horse forward at an easy walk. For several minutes they rode in silence, and Owen searched his mind for something to say that would not sound stupid or inappropriate. He had never been good at small talk, especially not with women, especially not with educated women from Philadelphia who made his heart beat faster than it had any right to. "You settled in at the Riverside Hotel," he finally managed. "Yes, very comfortably, thank you. Mrs. Chen has been wonderful. You were right that she does not pry into others' business. She is a good woman. Lost her husband in a mining accident 6 years back but kept the hotel running and raised her 2 children alone. People respect that around here." "There seem to be many strong women in the West," Delilah said quietly. "More than back east, perhaps, or at least they are allowed to show their strength more openly. The frontier does not care much for weakness, regardless of whether you wear trousers or skirts. Everyone works or everyone suffers." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That is part of why I came here." Owen had not intended to ask, had told himself firmly that her reasons were none of his concern, but the words came out anyway. "Why did you come here? To Colorado, I mean." "If you do not mind my asking." "I do not mind." But she fell silent again, and he thought she might not answer. Then she took a breath and continued. "I was engaged to be married to a man in Philadelphia, a respected lawyer, well-connected, approved by everyone in our social circle. I thought I loved him, or at least I thought I could learn to love him. 6 weeks before the wedding, I discovered he had been conducting an affair with my closest friend. That is terrible. I am sorry. So was I at first. But then I realized I was more angry than heartbroken, and that made me examine what I had been about to do. I would have married him knowing nothing about who he truly was, and I would have spent the rest of my life in a gilded cage, playing hostess and bearing children, and never once asking what I wanted from my own life." The bitterness in her voice startled him, but beneath it, he heard something else. Liberation, perhaps, or the beginning of it. "So I broke the engagement, which caused an enormous scandal. My reputation was effectively destroyed, at least in the circles that had defined my entire existence up until that point. My father was furious. He said I had shamed the family and squandered my one chance at a good marriage. We had a tremendous argument, during which I said many things I probably should not have said but do not regret." "What did you say?" Owen asked, genuinely curious now. "I told him I would rather die a spinster in the wilderness than live as a trophy wife to a faithless man. I told him his approval meant nothing if it came at the cost of my self-respect. I told him I was leaving, and he could either accept it or not, but he could not stop me." Owen felt a smile tug at his mouth despite himself. "I imagine that went over well. About as well as you might expect. He threatened to disown me, and I told him to go ahead. That was when my Aunt Catherine stepped in. She had never married, had always been the family's quiet scandal, and she offered to come west with me. She said she had always wanted to see the mountains before she died, and this seemed as good a time as any. So you came to Canon City. Not originally. We went first to Denver, but it felt too much like a smaller version of what I had left behind. Too many rules, too much concern with propriety and social standing. Then I met a woman in a bookshop who told me about Canon City. She said it was a place where people minded their own business and judged you by what you did rather than who you had been. So we came here. What will you do now? Do you have plans beyond borrowing books from Mrs. Patterson? Delilah laughed, and the sound was like water over stones, clear and unexpected. I have ideas, though I am not sure how practical they are. I taught children before, back in Philadelphia. I thought perhaps I could do that here if there is a need, or I could work in a shop or learn bookkeeping. I have a small inheritance from my mother that will support us for a while, but not indefinitely. I need to find a way to support myself and my aunt. They were approaching the outskirts of Canon City now, the buildings becoming visible in the fading light. Owen found himself wishing the ride could last longer, that he had more time to listen to her voice and learn about the woman who had walked away from everything familiar in search of something undefined but desperately needed. There is a woman named Delilah Morrison who runs the school here, he said. She is getting on in years and has been looking for someone to help her. Might be worth talking to her. Thank you, Mr. Hart. You have been very helpful both today and when we first arrived. I seem to be constantly in your debt. No debt, Owen said. Just neighbors helping neighbors. That is how things work out here. He rode to the Riverside Hotel and helped her dismount, his hands on her waist for just a moment before she stepped away. She smiled up at him, and in the twilight her eyes looked dark and deep. Perhaps I will see you again, she said. Canon City is not so large that we can avoid each other easily. Perhaps, Owen agreed, though his heart was saying definitely, certainly, as often as possible. He watched her go inside, then turned his horse toward the livery, his mind full of thoughts he had no business thinking and his solitude feeling for the first time like something less than sufficient. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange state of anticipation that Owen did his best to ignore and failed at completely. He saw Delilah 3 more times, each encounter brief and proper and absolutely insufficient. Once at the general store again, where they exchanged polite greetings, and she mentioned she had indeed spoken with Delilah Morrison about the teaching position. Once on the street, where she was walking with her aunt and merely nodded as they passed. Once at the small restaurant where he occasionally took meals, where she sat across the room with a book propped beside her plate and did not appear to notice him at all, though he could not take his eyes off her for more than a minute at a time. He told himself he was being foolish. She was educated and refined, from a world he knew nothing about. She had come here to escape one trap and would not be interested in walking into another, even if that trap was offered by a cowboy with nothing to recommend him but honest work and a room above a stable. Besides, Owen had learned long ago that caring about people only led to loss and pain. Better to admire from a distance and let tomorrow arrive alone, as it always did. But then came the afternoon when admiring from a distance stopped being an option, when circumstances forced him closer whether he wanted to be or not. Owen was in the saloon, not drinking but playing cards with 3 other ranch hands and winning modestly, when the door burst open and Catherine Winters rushed in, her face flushed, and her normally severe expression cracked with obvious fear. "I need help," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Is there a doctor? My niece has been injured." Owen was on his feet before conscious thought caught up with action. "What happened?" Catherine's eyes found him and widened with recognition and relief. "Mr. Hart." Thank goodness. Delilah went out to that abandoned homestead east of town, the one with all the old books the previous owner left behind. She wanted to see if any were suitable for the school, but she sent word by a boy that she has been hurt and cannot walk. The boy said she fell through rotted floorboards. "Where is Doc Matthews?" called out to a berthing at the Simpson Ranch, "will not be back until tomorrow." Owen grabbed his hat and headed for the door, Catherine following. "How badly is she hurt?" "I do not know." The boy said she was bleeding but conscious. He rode back to town to get help, then his mother would not let him guide me back. She said it was too dangerous after dark, which is nonsense, but I could not convince her. They were outside now, and Owen's mind was working through logistics. The abandoned Thompson homestead was nearly an hour's ride east, and full dark would fall within 30 minutes. "I will get my horse and lanterns. You should stay here." "Absolutely not. I am coming with you." Owen looked at the older woman's determined face and recognized an argument he would not win. "Can you ride?" "I can do whatever is necessary." 5 minutes later, they were riding out of Canon City. Owen on his own horse and Catherine on a rented mare, lanterns swinging from their saddles and casting wild shadows across the road. Owen pushed the pace as fast as he dared in the failing light, his mind running through possibilities. A fall through floorboards could mean anything from bruises to broken bones to worse. If she was bleeding significantly, if infection set in before they could get her back to town, if the fall had caused internal injuries. He cut off that line of thinking. Speculation helped no one. The only thing that mattered was getting to her as quickly as possible. The Thompson place had been abandoned for 3 years, after John Thompson decided mining offered better prospects than farming and moved his family to Leadville. The house remained, slowly surrendering to weather and neglect, its windows like empty eyes staring across overgrown fields. Owen had passed it countless times and never given it much thought. Now, as they approached in the darkness, the lantern light catching on warped boards and sagging roof, it looked like the set piece for a nightmare. "Delilah," Catherine called as they dismounted. "Delilah, we are here." "In here," came a voice from inside, tight with pain but blessedly alert. "Be careful of the floor." Owen took his lantern and entered first, testing each board before putting his full weight on it. The interior was a shambles of broken furniture and scattered possessions deemed not worth taking. Books lay in moldering piles against one wall, their pages spotted with mildew. And in the far corner, half visible in the lantern light, Delilah sat with her back against the wall and her right leg stretched out before her. "Mr. Hart," she said, and even through the pain in her voice he heard a note of relief. "I seem to have gotten myself into trouble." He crossed to her carefully, Catherine right behind him. In the yellow light he could see blood on her dress where it was torn at the knee, and her face was pale beneath the dirt and sweat. "What hurts besides your leg?" he asked, crouching beside her. "My leg is the worst of it. I felt something tear when I fell, and I think there may be a nail or piece of wood still in it, though I have not looked. My hands are scraped and I hit my head, but I do not think seriously. Mostly I feel incredibly stupid for not testing the floor before walking across it. Let me see." Owen raised the lantern and gently lifted the torn fabric of her dress. The wound was several inches long, ragged and dirty, and definitely still contained splinters. Blood had soaked the fabric around it, though it seemed to be clotting. "This needs to be cleaned and stitched. We have to get you back to town." "Can you stand?" Catherine asked, taking her niece's hand. "I tried earlier. I became very dizzy and nearly fainted." Owen made a decision. "I am going to carry you. It is going to hurt when I move you, but there is no help for it." "I understand." He handed his lantern to Catherine. then carefully slid one arm beneath Delilah's knees and the other behind her back. She gasped when he lifted her, and he felt her fingers dig into his shoulder, but she did not cry out. She weighed less than he expected, and he could feel her trembling as he carried her out of the house. Getting her onto his horse while minimizing pain and maintaining modesty proved challenging, but they managed it with Catherine's help. Owen mounted behind Delilah, and she leaned back against his chest, her head resting just below his chin. He could feel her shaking, whether from pain or shock or cold he could not tell. "Hold on to me," he said quietly. "I will go as smoothly as I can, but it is a rough ride back." Her hands gripped his forearms where they encircled her waist. "I am sorry to be so much trouble." "You are no trouble. Just stay conscious, all right. Talk to me if you need to. Tell me if the pain gets worse." The ride back to Canon City was the longest hour of Owen's life. He held Delilah as carefully as if she were made of glass, trying to absorb the impact of the horse's movement with his own body so she would feel less of it. Catherine rode beside them, her face set in lines of worry that aged her 10 years. Delilah stayed conscious but spoke little, her breathing shallow and quick in a way that concerned him. By the time they reached town, lights were burning in windows and a few people were still on the streets. Owen rode directly to Doc Matthews's office, knowing the old physician was not back yet, but hoping his wife would be there. Martha Matthews opened the door at his knock, took one look at Delilah's bloodied leg and ushered them inside. "Put her on the examining table," she said briskly. Martha had assisted her husband for 30 years and knew as much practical medicine as most trained doctors. "What happened?" While Owen carefully laid Delilah on the table and Catherine explained about the fall and the wound, Martha gathered supplies and lit more lamps. She cut away the torn section of Delilah's dress, examined the injury with experienced eyes, and nodded to herself. "Not as bad as it could be, but it needs thorough cleaning and stitching. You got splinters deep in there, girl, and some dirt. I will do what I can, but this is going to hurt." "I understand," Delilah said through gritted teeth. "Mr. Hart, I will need you to hold her shoulders still. Miss Catherine, you hold her other leg steady. This part is not going to be pleasant." What followed was indeed not pleasant. Martha worked with efficient competence, but removing embedded wood and cleaning a deep wound was brutally painful. Delilah bit down on a leather strap and gripped Owen's forearms hard enough to leave bruises, and tears ran down her face though she made almost no sound. Owen found himself murmuring to her without quite knowing what he said, words meant to distract and comfort, and she fixed her eyes on his face as if his presence was the only thing keeping her anchored against the pain. When Martha finally began stitching, the worst was over. Delilah's grip on Owen's arms loosened, and her breathing started to even out. By the time the last stitch was tied and the wound bandaged, exhaustion had replaced pain in her expression. "You will need to stay off that leg for at least a week," Martha said, washing her hands in a basin. "After that, limited walking for another 2 weeks. The stitches come out in 10 days. I will give you willow bark tea for the pain, and you need to watch for any sign of infection. Redness, increased swelling, fever, any of that, and you come straight back here day or night. Understood?" "Yes, madam, thank you." Martha looked at Catherine. "She should not be climbing stairs for a few days. Does your hotel room have stairs?" "It is on the 2nd floor." "Then she stays here tonight. I have a back room with a bed. She can go back to the hotel tomorrow if she is doing well." "I could not impose," Delilah started to protest, but Martha cut her off. "Not an imposition, it is medical sense. Besides, Charles will not be back until tomorrow afternoon anyway, so the room is empty. You can argue if you want, but you will lose." Despite everything, Delilah smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Matthews." Owen helped move her to the back room, his arms once again holding her weight as if it was the most natural thing in the world. When she was settled in the narrow bed, covers pulled up to her chin, Catherine sat beside her and took her hand. "I should go," Owen said awkwardly, suddenly aware that his presence was no longer necessary and that standing in a lady's bedroom, even under these circumstances, was not entirely proper. "Mr. Hart," Delilah said, and he paused at the door. "Thank you for everything. For coming to get me, for bringing me back. I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there. Anyone would have done the same, perhaps, but you were the one who did." Her eyes met his, and something passed between them. Some acknowledgement that this night had changed things in ways neither of them had quite processed yet. Owen nodded, touched his hat brim in that automatic gesture of politeness, and left before he could say something that would reveal just how terrified he had been when he saw her blood-soaked dress, just how right she had felt in his arms, just how much the thought of her being seriously injured had shaken something loose inside him that he had kept carefully locked away for years. He walked back to the livery through the quiet streets, his mind churning. This was exactly what he had tried to avoid. This caring, this fear, this sense of being pulled into someone else's orbit whether he wanted to be or not. Tomorrow should mean alone, had always meant alone. That was safer, simpler, proof against loss. But tonight, holding Delilah against his chest on the long ride back to town, feeling her trust and vulnerability and determination not to give in to pain, alone had felt like the loneliest word in the world. The next morning, Owen told himself he would not visit the doctor's office, would not check on Delilah, would give her space and return to his own life. He told himself this firmly while he was washing up, told himself again while he was eating breakfast, and was still telling himself when his feet carried him to Doc Matthews's door entirely against his better judgment. Martha answered his knock and smiled knowingly. "She is awake and doing well. Go on back." The door to the back room stood ajar, and through it Owen could see Delilah sitting propped up in bed, her injured leg elevated on pillows. She was reading one of the books from the Thompson place, somehow salvaged despite everything, and morning light through the window turned her hair into fire. She looked up at his knock, and her face brightened. "Mr. Hart, come in, please." He entered awkwardly, holding his hat in both hands like a schoolboy. "I wanted to check that you were all right, after last night. Thanks to you, I am much better than I have any right to be. The pain is manageable, and Mrs. Matthews says I am healing cleanly so far." She gestured to a chair beside the bed. "Please sit. I have been alone most of the morning, and I would welcome company." Owen sat, still holding his hat, acutely aware that they were alone together in a way that was probably not appropriate. But Delilah seemed unconcerned with propriety, and he found he did not care as much as he probably should. "Where is your aunt?" "She went to the hotel to fetch some things for me, and to let Mrs. Chen know I will be staying here another night. She will be back soon." Delilah closed her book and regarded him with those disconcertingly direct green eyes. "You know, last night I realized I know almost nothing about you. You have helped me several times now, but we have never really talked beyond practical necessities. Not much to tell. Somehow I doubt that." "Where are you from originally?" Owen hesitated. He did not talk about his past, had spent years perfecting the art of deflection and vague answers. But something about the way Delilah looked at him, curious but not prying, interested but not demanding, made the usual walls seem unnecessary. "Texas originally, a ranch outside San Antonio. My father raised horses, good horses. I grew up working with them." "Do you still have family there?" "No, my mother died when I was 12, fever. My father died 5 years later. He was breaking a stallion, got thrown, broke his neck." After that, I sold the ranch and went north. I have been moving around ever since, working different jobs, going wherever the work takes me. That must be a lonely life. I got used to it. Lonely is safer than the alternative. Delilah tilted her head, studying him. What is the alternative? Caring about people, getting attached, losing them. The words came out harsher than he intended. Everyone I ever cared about either died or left. After a while, you learn the lesson. That is a very sad way to see the world, maybe, but it is honest. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, I understand more than you might think. After my engagement fell apart, after I realized how close I had come to making a terrible mistake, I felt like I could not trust anyone. Not my friends who had known about the affair and said nothing. Not my family, who cared more about appearances than my happiness. Not even myself for being so blind. I thought perhaps the answer was to never let anyone close enough to hurt me again. What changed? My aunt. She risked everything to come with me to help me start over. She did not have to. She could have stayed safe in Philadelphia, kept her comfortable life. But she chose me instead. She chose love and loyalty over safety. That taught me something important. What was that? That the risk is worth it. That a life without connection, without caring, is not really a life at all. It is just existence. Her eyes held his. You saved me last night, Mr. Hart. Not just my leg, but possibly my life. That was a risk. You could have stayed in the saloon playing cards. You could have let someone else go, but you did not. So maybe you are not quite as committed to being alone as you think. Owen found he had no answer to that. The words hit too close to truths he had been avoiding since the moment he first saw her in the general store. Before he could formulate a response, Catherine returned, her arms full of bags and her face showing relief at finding her niece in good spirits. The moment of intimacy broke and Owen stood quickly. I should let you rest, he said to Delilah. Will you come back? To visit, I mean. I will be trapped in this bed for several days, and I would appreciate the company. He knew he should say no, should make excuses, should protect himself from the dangerous path this was leading down. Instead, he heard himself say, Yes, I will come back. Her smile was worth every bit of risk it represented. Over the next week, Owen found himself at the doctor's office every day, sometimes twice. He told himself he was just checking on a neighbor, being polite, fulfilling the Western code of helping those in need. He did not examine too closely why his heart beat faster when he approached the door, why he found himself thinking about what to say during his visits, why the hours between those visits seemed to drag, while the visits themselves flew by too quickly. They talked, really talked, in a way Owen had not talked to another person in years. Delilah told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her education at a private school for girls, about the pressure to marry well and the suffocating expectations of society. She told him about her mother, who had died when Delilah was 16, and how that loss had made her start questioning what she wanted from life. She told him about books she loved, ideas she had about education and equality, dreams she had not dared voice back east but felt free to explore here. Owen, in turn, found himself sharing things he had kept locked away. He told her about his mother's gentle hands and her love of singing, how she had filled their small house with music. He told her about his father's skill with horses and his harder edges, the way drink sometimes turned him mean though never violent. He told her about the years of drifting after his father's death, the cattle drives and ranch work, the towns he had passed through without settling. He told her about the loneliness he had accepted as permanent and the fear that had kept him from reaching for anything more. But you stayed here in Canon City, she observed during one of these conversations. You have been here for what, 2 years? 3 on and off. I leave for cattle drives, seasonal work, but I keep coming back. Why? Owen considered the question. I suppose it feels as close to home as anywhere has since I left Texas. The mountains remind me that there are things bigger than personal troubles. The people mostly leave you alone but will help if you need it. It is a good balance. Do you think you will stay permanently? I never thought about permanent. Permanent requires planning for a future, and I have mostly lived day to day. What would make you consider permanent? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them quite acknowledged. Owen met her eyes and saw the same awareness there, the same recognition that their conversations had become something more than polite exchanges between acquaintances. I do not know, he said honestly. I suppose I would need a reason to stay. Color rose in her cheeks and she looked away first. Well, I hope you find one. By the end of the week, Delilah was walking with the aid of a crutch, the wound healing cleanly much to Martha Matthews's satisfaction. She returned to the Riverside Hotel, where Mrs. Chen had moved her to a ground-floor room to spare her the stairs. Owen helped with the move, carrying her bags and making sure she was settled comfortably. "Thank you again," she said when he prepared to leave. "For everything. I seem to say that constantly around you. You do not need to thank me, I know, but I want to." She hesitated, then added, "Owen, I spoke with Alina Morrison this morning. She has officially offered me the position helping at the school starting next week. So it seems I will be staying in Canon City for the foreseeable future. I am glad. The children here need a good teacher. I am glad too, and not just because of the position." Her meaning was clear, and Owen felt something in his chest that might have been hope if he let himself name it. "Get some rest," he said. "You are pushing yourself too hard too fast," says the man who works from dawn to dusk 6 days a week. "That is different. Why? Because I am used to it," she laughed. "That is terrible logic, but I will let it pass. Will I see you tomorrow if you want?" "I want." Owen left before he could do something foolish like kiss her, which he had been thinking about with increasing frequency and decreasing sense. She was recovering from an injury, new to town, vulnerable in ways that made any romantic advance inappropriate. Besides, he still was not certain he was ready for whatever this was becoming, this connection that felt both terrifying and inevitable. But as autumn deepened into early winter and Delilah began working at the school, seeing each other stopped being a question of if and became simply part of daily life. Owen found reasons to walk past the schoolhouse during lunch breaks, catching glimpses of her with the children clustered around her. She started taking meals at the restaurant where he ate, always seeming to arrive at the same time. They ran into each other at the general store, at the post office, on the street, encounters that felt less like coincidence and more like magnetic pull. People began to notice, of course. In a town the size of Canon City, everything was noticed and discussed. Martha Matthews mentioned casually that they made a handsome couple. Samuel Garrett asked Owen if he was courting the teacher. Even Mrs. Chen, normally the soul of discretion, smiled knowingly whenever Delilah mentioned Owen's name. "People are talking," Delilah said one afternoon as they walked along the river, moving slowly to accommodate her still healing leg. It was late November, cold enough that their breath misted in the air, and the river ran gray and swift between ice-rimmed banks. People always talk. It is what people do when they do not have enough excitement in their own lives. Does it bother you, the talk? Should it bother you? You are the one whose reputation they are discussing. Delilah laughed. "Owen, my reputation was destroyed back in Philadelphia. Out here I am rebuilding from nothing, which means I have nothing to lose. I do not care what people say as long as I know my own truth." "What is your truth?" She stopped walking and turned to face him, the winter light harsh on her face but somehow making her more beautiful, not less. that I came here to escape one set of expectations and discover who I am without them, that I found work I love, a place I am beginning to feel is home, and someone I care about who seems to care about me in return unless I am badly misreading the situation. Owen's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment, the point where he could step forward or step back, choose risk or choose safety. Every instinct honed over years of protecting himself screamed to choose safety, to deflect, to make a joke and change the subject. "You are not misreading anything," he heard himself say. Her smile was like sunrise. "Good. Because I have been hoping for weeks that you might kiss me, and I was starting to think I would have to do it myself, which would be very forward, but I was becoming desperate enough to consider it." Owen laughed, surprised into genuine joy. "You are unlike any woman I have ever met. I will take that as a compliment. It was meant as one." He stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath. "Delilah, I should tell you, I am not good at this. Relationships, feelings, any of it. I will probably disappoint you. And I should tell you that I am stubborn and opinionated and unconventional, and I will probably frustrate you regularly. But I think we could be good for each other anyway, if we are brave enough to try. I think you might be right." He kissed her then, there beside the freezing river with winter settling over the mountains, and it felt like the most terrifying and necessary thing he had ever done. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, tomorrow stopped meaning alone. They did not rush things, despite the intensity of their feelings. Delilah had her teaching position to establish, her place in the community to secure. Owen continued working at various ranches around Canon City, saving money, and for the first time in his life making plans that extended beyond next week or next month. They courted properly, by the standards of the time and place, with walks and meals and conversations that lasted hours. Catherine approved of Owen, which helped. "He is a good man," she told her niece over breakfast one morning in January. "Honest, hardworking, and he looks at you like you hung the moon. Those are not small things. I know. I just want to be sure we are both ready. I do not want to rush into something again without being certain. Delilah, you were never certain with Richard, not really. You were going through motions, following expectations. This is entirely different, but take your time. Real love can wait." Winter in Canon City was harsh but beautiful. Snow blanketed the valley and piled high in the mountains, transforming the landscape into something pristine and timeless. The school closed for 2 weeks during the worst of the cold, and Owen took work closer to town, unwilling to be far from Delilah for extended periods. They spent Christmas together, a quiet celebration with Catherine and a few other friends they had made. Owen gave Delilah a set of books he had ordered specially from Denver, volumes on education theory and child development. She gave him a new hat, better quality than anything he had ever owned, and a scarf she had knitted herself, despite admitting she was terrible at it. The scarf was indeed imperfect, with uneven stitches and one end slightly longer than the other, and Owen loved it more than any gift he had ever received. "It is awful," she said, laughing. "I am sorry. I should have just bought something." "It is perfect," Owen said, and meant it. "You made it for me. That makes it perfect." She kissed him then, in front of Catherine and God and anyone who cared to notice, and he kissed her back without reservation. As winter softened into early spring, Owen began seriously considering his future for the first time since his father's death. He had saved a decent amount of money over the years of constant work, enough to make a down payment on land or a small business. The question was what he wanted to do with it, what kind of life he wanted to build now that building a life seemed possible. He was thinking about this while working at the Garrett Ranch in March when Samuel approached him with an unexpected proposition. "I am getting too old for this work," Samuel said bluntly. He was 63, with a bad back and arthritis in his hands. "My son wants no part of ranching. He is going to Denver to work in banking, if you can believe that. Point is, I am looking to sell the ranch. Not immediately, but within the next year or so. You interested?" Owen stared at him. "I could never afford your ranch. Maybe not at full price, but I am more interested in finding someone who will take care of the land than in extracting every dollar. You have worked for me on and off for 3 years. You know the property, you know the work, and you are good at it. I could sell to you on terms, let you pay it off over time. You would need maybe a third of the purchase price as a down payment, and we could work out the rest." "Samuel, that is incredibly generous, but nothing. Think about it. You got yourself a good woman now, everyone knows that. You are going to want to marry her, am I right?" Owen felt heat rise in his face. "I am thinking about it. So think about this too. A man needs something to offer a wife besides hard work and good intentions. A ranch, even a small one like mine, that is security. That is a future." Owen promised to think about it, and think about it he did. He walked the boundaries of the Garrett Ranch, calculated numbers, considered possibilities. It was a good property, well watered with decent grazing land. The house needed work but was fundamentally sound. With proper management, it could support a family comfortably, maybe even prosper. The more he thought about it, the more right it felt. But it was a massive decision, one that would define the rest of his life. Before he could commit to it, he needed to know if Delilah would be part of that life, not as a hope or a possibility, but as a certainty. On an evening in late March, with the first wildflowers beginning to appear on the hillsides and the river running high with snowmelt, Owen asked Delilah to walk with him to a place he wanted to show her. They rode out to the Garrett Ranch, to a spot on a low hill overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the mountains stood sharp against the horizon. "It is beautiful here," Delilah said, turning in a slow circle to take in the view. "Why have you never brought me here before?" "I wanted to wait until I was ready to tell you what I am about to tell you." She turned to face him, curiosity and something else, something hopeful in her expression. Owen took a breath. "Samuel Garrett is selling his ranch. He has offered to sell it to me on terms I can afford if I am willing to work for it. It would not be easy. Building something from almost nothing never is. But it would be mine, ours if you wanted it to be. It would be a home, a real home, not a room above a stable or a hotel." "Owen, that is wonderful. You should absolutely do it." "I want to, but I have to know something first." He reached for her hands, holding them in his. "Delilah, 6 months ago I thought tomorrow always meant alone. I thought that was safer, that caring about people only led to loss and pain. Then you fell through some rotted floorboards and crashed into my life, and everything changed." She laughed, tears suddenly bright in her eyes. "That is the least romantic description of our meeting possible. I am not finished. You changed everything because you showed me that alone is not the same as safe. It is just lonely. You made me want things I had stopped letting myself want. A home, a future, someone to share it with. You made tomorrow mean something different. What does tomorrow mean now, together? If you will have me, Delilah Keene, will you marry me?" She did not answer immediately, and for a heart-stopping moment Owen thought he had miscalculated, moved too fast, assumed too much. Then she was kissing him, her arms around his neck and her tears wet against his cheeks, and he knew the answer before she pulled back enough to say it. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes. I love you, Owen Hart. I think I have loved you since you carried me back to town and held me while Martha cleaned my wound. Maybe even before that. I love you too. I am not sure I even knew what love was before you." They stood on that hillside until the stars came out, planning and dreaming and kissing between words. They would marry as soon as arrangements could be made. Owen would buy the ranch, and they would work it together. Delilah could continue teaching in town. The ranch was close enough for an easy ride. They would build something lasting, something real, something neither of them had truly believed possible before they found each other. The wedding took place in May, a simple ceremony in the small church in Canon City with Catherine and a handful of friends as witnesses. Delilah wore a pale yellow dress she had made herself, and Owen wore new clothes purchased specially for the occasion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared held all the promise of their shared future. They moved into the ranch house immediately, spending the first weeks cleaning and repairing and making it truly theirs. Catherine stayed at the Riverside Hotel, insisting that newlyweds needed privacy, but visited often and became a fixture at their dinner table. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both new and eternal. Owen worked the ranch with renewed purpose, knowing his labor was building something permanent. Delilah taught during the school term and helped with ranch work during summers and weekends. They learned each other's rhythms, quirks, and moods. They had their first real argument over where to plant the kitchen garden and made up in bed with laughter and kisses. They weathered a late spring snowstorm and a dry spell in July that had them both worried about water. By autumn, they had fallen completely into partnership, each supporting the other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. The ranch began to prosper modestly under Owen's careful management and Delilah's knack for bookkeeping. The school board raised her salary in recognition of her excellent work. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and happy in ways that had nothing to do with money. In December, nearly a year after their first kiss by the river, Delilah told Owen she was pregnant. "I am terrified," she admitted, her hand on her still flat stomach. "What if something goes wrong? What if I am not a good mother?" Owen pulled her close, his own fear mixing with fierce joy. "We will figure it out together. That is what we do." "Your mother died young," she said quietly. "Mine too. What if? Do not borrow trouble. Doc Matthews will take good care of you and I will be here every step of the way. We are going to be fine." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, much to everyone's relief. Delilah continued teaching until March, when she became too uncomfortable to stand for long periods. Catherine moved out to the ranch to help, taking over household duties as Delilah grew heavier and more awkward. Owen tried not to show his fear, but it rode him like a shadow. Every time he remembered his mother's death, every time he considered all the ways childbirth could go wrong, he had to remind himself that fear helped nothing. Delilah needed his strength, not his worry. On a warm night in early July of 1876, Delilah went into labor. Doc Matthews arrived quickly, Martha with him, and together they took over the bedroom while Owen paced in the main room like a caged animal. Catherine sat calmly in a rocking chair, knitting, but he could see tension in her shoulders. "She is strong," Catherine said during one of Owen's circuits past her chair, "and she has the best care available. Try to have faith." "I am trying." The hours dragged with terrible slowness. Night deepened, and still the sounds from the bedroom continued, Delilah's occasional cries cutting through Owen like knives. He wanted to go to her, but Martha had firmly told him to stay out, that he would only be in the way. Dawn was breaking when he finally heard a different sound. A thin, reedy wail that grew stronger with each breath. Owen stopped pacing, his heart seeming to stop as well. The bedroom door opened and Doc Matthews emerged, tired but smiling. "You have a son, Owen. A healthy boy with a good set of lungs, and your wife is doing fine, just exhausted." Owen's legs nearly gave out with relief. "Can I see them?" "Give Martha a few more minutes to get them cleaned up and settled. Then you can meet your boy." When he was finally allowed into the bedroom, the early morning light was streaming through the window, turning everything golden. Delilah lay propped up against pillows, her hair damp and her face pale with exhaustion, but smiling. In her arms, wrapped in a blanket Catherine had knitted, was the smallest human being Owen had ever seen. "Come meet your son," Delilah said softly. Owen crossed to the bed on unsteady legs. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, his eyes squeezed shut, one tiny fist waving in the air. He was perfect and terrifying and the most beautiful thing Owen had ever seen besides his mother. "He is so small," Owen whispered. "He will grow. Here, do you want to hold him?" Owen had never held a baby in his life, but he reached out carefully and Delilah placed their son in his arms. The baby was warm and solid despite his small size, and as Owen looked down at him, something fundamental shifted in his chest. This was his son, his family, his future made flesh. "What should we name him?" Delilah asked. They had discussed names but never quite decided. Now, looking at his son's face in the morning light, Owen knew James, after my father. "If that is all right with you, James Hart, I like it." Delilah reached up to touch Owen's face. "We did it. We made a whole person. You did most of the work." "Well, yes, but we are in this together, remember? That is what we do." Little James grew quickly, filling the house with noise and chaos and joy. He was a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried except when hungry or wet. Catherine doted on him shamelessly, and Delilah proved to be a natural mother despite her earlier fears. Owen found himself enchanted by the smallest things. The way James's hand could wrap around his finger, the way he gurgled and cooed, the way his face lit up when he saw his parents. Life was busier than ever, with ranch work and a baby and Delilah returning to teaching part-time once James was old enough. But it was full in a way Owen had never imagined possible. The loneliness that had defined most of his life seemed like a distant memory, something from another existence entirely. Over the next several years, their family grew. A daughter arrived in 1878, whom they named Sarah after Delilah's mother. Then another son in 1880, whom they called Thomas. The house rang with children's laughter, and the ranch prospered enough that they could hire occasional help during busy seasons. Catherine stayed with them permanently, her health declining slowly but her mind sharp and her love for her grandnieces and grandnephews boundless. She died peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1883, her last words to Owen a whispered thank you for making her niece so happy. Through it all, through births and deaths and hard times and good, Owen and Delilah remained each other's anchor. They still took walks by the river when time allowed, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They argued sometimes, as any couple did, but always came back together with renewed appreciation for what they had built. One evening in the summer of 1885, as they sat on the porch watching their 3 children play in the yard, Delilah leaned her head on Owen's shoulder. "Do you ever think about that day in the general store when we first met?" she asked. "Sometimes. I almost did not speak to you, did you know that? I almost just walked away. What made you speak up?" "I do not know exactly. Something about you, the determination in your voice. The way you were so clearly out of your depth, but refusing to admit it. I recognized something of myself in that, I think. I am glad you spoke. I am glad I fell through those floorboards. I am glad for every strange coincidence and lucky break that brought us together. Even the infected leg and the painful stitching," she laughed. "Even that. It was worth it to find you." Owen kissed the top of her head. "I spent so many years believing tomorrow meant alone. I had convinced myself that was the only way to stay safe, to avoid loss. But you taught me that the risk is worth it, that a life shared is infinitely richer than a life protected. "You taught me something too," Delilah said. "You taught me that real love is not about pretty words and social position. It is about showing up, about staying, about building something together one day at a time. You taught me what partnership really means." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as James, now 9 years old, helped his 6-year-old sister Sarah catch fireflies while 5-year-old Thomas toddled after them. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, the river sang its constant song, and the land they had built their life on spread around them in the gathering dusk. "Do you ever regret leaving Philadelphia?" Owen asked. "Not for one single moment. That life was never really mine. This is. This ranch, these children, this is the life I was meant to have, I think. I just had to be brave enough to reach for it. We both did. Yes, we both did." As the stars began to appear and Delilah called the children in for bed, Owen reflected on the strange path that had brought him here. From the lonely cowboy who believed tomorrow meant alone, to a husband and father surrounded by love and noise and the beautiful chaos of family. Alone had become together, and together beside Delilah had become everything he never knew he needed. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges as years always did. The ranch had good seasons and difficult ones. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. James showed aptitude for working with horses, inheriting his grandfather's gift, though he had never known the man. Sarah proved to be brilliant with numbers and wanted to study accounting. Thomas was still young, but showed signs of being a natural teacher like his mother. Owen and Delilah grew older together, their hair showing more gray, their faces gaining lines that spoke of laughter and hard work and years lived fully. They never became wealthy in monetary terms, but they were rich in the ways that mattered. Their children were healthy and happy. Their marriage remained strong, weathering the storms of life with the resilience of two people who chose each other every day, not just on the day they said their vows. In 1890, when James was 14 and beginning to seriously help with ranch work, Owen took him to the hillside where he had proposed to Delilah 15 years earlier. The view was unchanged, still breathtaking, still capable of inspiring awe at the vastness and beauty of the world. "Your mother and I stood here the night I asked her to marry me," Owen told his son. "I wanted to show you this place because someday this ranch will be yours if you want it, and I wanted you to understand what it represents." "What does it represent?" James asked. "A choice. I spent a long time running from everything, afraid to put down roots or care too deeply because I had lost people I loved. But your mother taught me that choosing to love, choosing to stay, choosing to build something permanent, that is not weakness. It is the bravest thing a person can do." James listened with the seriousness of youth trying to understand adult wisdom. "Were you really that alone before you met Mother?" "I was. I thought it was necessary, even preferable. I was wrong. The best parts of my life all started the day I decided to stop being alone and start being part of something bigger than myself." "I want that," James said. "Someday, I mean. A family, a home, all of it. You will find it when you are ready. Just remember that real love is not flashy or dramatic. It is showing up every day, doing the work, being there even when it is hard. It is choosing each other over and over again." They stood together looking out over the land that was their legacy, and Owen felt a deep satisfaction knowing that what he and Delilah had built would continue beyond them. By the mid-1890s, the children were growing into young adults. James, at 19, was effectively running much of the ranch operations, allowing Owen to slow down a bit. Sarah, at 16, had been accepted to a school in Denver that taught bookkeeping and business to women, a rare opportunity she seized with enthusiasm. Thomas, at 15, was helping his mother at the school in Canon City and showing real talent for teaching. Owen was 52 now, feeling the accumulated aches of a lifetime of hard physical labor, but still strong enough to do a full day's work when needed. Delilah was 45. Her beauty matured into something deeper and more lasting than the pretty young woman he had first seen in the general store. One evening in the spring of 1896, as they prepared for bed after a long day, Delilah sat at her dressing table brushing her hair and watching Owen in the mirror. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. "I was just thinking how lucky I am, how lucky we both are. I think about that often. Do you remember what you said to me that day by the river? When you proposed, I remember every word. You said I made tomorrow mean something different, made it mean together instead of alone." She turned to face him. "You did the same for me, you know. I came west running from one life and not sure what I was running toward. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to believe in tomorrow." Owen crossed to her and took her hands, pulling her to her feet. "We gave each other that. We built it together one day at a time, one choice at a time. And we are not done yet. We still have years ahead of us, God willing. What do you want from those years? This. Exactly this. You, our children, this land. Maybe grandchildren someday, though I am in no rush. I want to watch the seasons turn and know I am exactly where I am supposed to be." She kissed him, soft and sweet and familiar. "That sounds perfect." They did get grandchildren eventually. James married a local girl named Emma in 1899, and their first child, a daughter they named Delilah after her grandmother, arrived the following year. Sarah finished her schooling and took a position with a business in Denver, scandalizing some and inspiring others. She married a fellow accountant in 1902 and had twin boys a year later. Thomas went to college in Denver to study education, came back to Canon City to teach alongside his mother, and married his childhood sweetheart in 1904. Owen and Delilah became grandparents multiple times over, their house once again filled with the sounds of young children during family gatherings. They watched with pride and satisfaction as their children built their own lives, made their own choices, created their own versions of the happiness their parents had found together. In 1908, on their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 3 generations sat around the extended dinner table, the room loud with conversation and laughter. Owen looked around at the faces of his children and grandchildren, at his wife of 30 years still beautiful in his eyes, and felt a contentment so profound, it was almost overwhelming. Later, after the guests had left and the house had returned to quiet, he and Delilah took their customary walk to the river. It was May again, the same month they had married, and the wildflowers covered the hillsides in waves of color. 30 years, Delilah said, linking her arm through his. Some days it feels like 30 minutes and others like we have always been together. Both are true, I think. Time is strange that way. Do you remember what you were like when we met? So determined to be alone, so convinced that was the only safe way to live. Owen smiled. I was an idiot. You were scared. There is a difference. I was both. But you were patient with me. You let me figure out that I could trust you, that loving you would not destroy me. You saved me, Delilah. We saved each other. That is what love does when you let it. They reached the riverbank and stood watching the water flow past, constant and eternal. The mountains rose around them, the same mountains that had witnessed their beginning and would outlast their ending. But between those 2 points, between the frightened, lonely cowboy and whatever the future held, lay 30 years of shared life that had transformed them both. "I love you," Owen said, the words as true and necessary as they had been the first time he spoke them. "I love you too. Always." They stood together beside the river as the sun set and the first stars appeared, two people who had chosen each other and built a life from that choice. Alone had become together, and together had become everything. And tomorrow, when it came as it always did, would find them still side by side, still choosing each other, still grateful for the day a young woman fell through rotted floorboards and crashed into the life of a cowboy who thought he was meant to be alone forever. The years that followed their 30th anniversary were gentle, allowing Owen and Delilah to ease into the rhythms of older age without the trauma of sudden loss or catastrophe. James ran the ranch with skill and dedication, his own children growing up with the same love of the land their grandfather had instilled. Sarah thrived in Denver, her business acumen earning respect in a field still dominated by men. Thomas continued teaching, eventually becoming principal of the Canon City school where his mother had once taught. Owen's body betrayed the decades of hard labor with increasing frequency. His joints ached in the morning, and he could not work the long days he once had. But he remained active, helping James when possible and spending more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope and care for the land. Delilah, too, felt the weight of years. She retired from teaching at 60, her eyes too tired for the close work of grading papers, and her energy insufficient for managing a classroom of boisterous children. But she remained sharp and engaged, reading voraciously and corresponding with former students who had gone on to colleges and careers she had helped make possible. In 1912, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Owen and Delilah celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by their entire family. The gathering was larger now, with more grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren beginning to appear. The ranch house bulged with people, the noise almost overwhelming but wonderful in its chaos. Owen, now 70, stood on the porch watching the celebration and feeling the full weight of his years. He was tired in a way that sleep could not cure, but it was a good tired, the exhaustion of a life fully lived rather than endured. Delilah joined him, moving more slowly now but still graceful. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything." "Nothing. How lucky I am." "How impossible all of this would have seemed to the man I was before I met you." "Do you ever wish you could go back and tell that younger version of yourself what was coming?" Owen considered. "No. I think he needed to find his own way to you, to us. Knowing the destination would have cheapened the journey somehow. That is very philosophical for a cowboy." "I am a retired cowboy. We are allowed to be philosophical." She laughed and took his hand. "Come back inside. Your grandson wants you to tell the story again." "Which story?" "The one about the day we met. He makes me tell it constantly, but he wants your version too." Owen allowed himself to be led back inside, where 10-year-old Michael, James's youngest, immediately attached himself to his grandfather's side. "Tell me the story, Grandpa. Tell me how you met Grandma." Owen settled into his chair, Delilah beside him, and began the tale he had told countless times to children and grandchildren. But it never grew old, because each telling reminded him of the miracle of it, the impossibility that this lonely, frightened man and this brave, determined woman had found each other in a general store in Canon City, Colorado, and built a life neither of them could have imagined alone. "It started with a gun," Owen began, and Michael's eyes went wide with excitement. "Not the way you are thinking. I had not drawn my gun in anger for 3 years, but I still wore it everywhere, still let my hand drift toward it whenever I felt threatened. That is how you could tell I was a man who expected trouble, who had known too much of it in his life. He continued the story, touching on all the important moments: the general store, the injured leg, the long ride back to town with Delilah in his arms, the walks by the river, the proposal on the hillside, the wedding in May. He told it simply, without embellishment, because the truth needed no decoration. The most important thing, he concluded, looking at Michael but speaking to all the young faces watching him, is that your grandmother taught me something I had forgotten or maybe never learned. She taught me that being alone is not the same as being safe. It is just being alone. And that choosing to love someone, to build a life with them, that is not weakness or foolishness. It is the bravest thing you can do. Will I find someone like Grandma? Michael asked. If you are very lucky and very brave, you might, but do not spend your life looking for it. Live well, be kind, be open to possibility. Love finds you when you are ready for it, not necessarily when you go searching. The party continued late into the evening, and by the time the last guests departed, both Owen and Delilah were exhausted. They prepared for bed slowly, their nighttime routine unchanged in 40 years, comfortable as old shoes. That was a good day, Delilah said, climbing carefully into bed beside him. It was, though I am getting too old for parties that size. We are both getting old. But we are doing it together, which makes it bearable. Owen pulled her close, her head resting on his shoulder as it had on countless nights. Together, always together. Always, she agreed. And within minutes they were both asleep, worn out by celebration and surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. The years rolled on with increasing speed, as they always seemed to do in the later stages of life. 1915 brought the war in Europe, though it seemed distant and unreal from their mountain valley. 1917 brought America into that conflict, and with it the fear as grandsons old enough were called to serve. Thankfully, all returned safely, though changed by what they had seen. 1920 arrived with fanfare and parties celebrating a new decade. Owen was 78 now, frail but mentally sharp, confined mostly to the house but still engaged with his family and the ranch. Delilah was 71, her movements slow but her mind as quick as ever. They spent their days reading to each other, playing cards, receiving visits from the endless stream of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who filled their lives with joy. One evening in early spring of 1921, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Owen reached for Delilah's hand. You remember when I proposed, I said you made tomorrow mean something different. I remember. I have had thousands of tomorrows with you since then. Thousands of days waking up beside you, working alongside you, building this life together. And every single one was a gift I never expected to receive. Delilah squeezed his hand. We were both so lost when we met. So determined to protect ourselves from being hurt that we almost missed each other entirely. I am so grateful we were brave enough to take the risk. Me too. Whatever happens, whatever time we have left, I want you to know that you made my life worth living. Before you, I was just existing, moving from one day to the next without purpose or hope. You gave me both. You gave me everything. Owen Hart, are you getting maudlin in your old age? Maybe. Is that so bad? No, she said softly. It is sweet. And for the record, you gave me everything too. A home, a family, a purpose. Love that never wavered even when times were hard. You took a scared young woman running from her old life and helped her build something better than she ever imagined possible. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains and the first stars appeared. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of new grass and wild flowers, promising another spring, another summer, another cycle of seasons. "I am tired," Owen said eventually. "So am I. Let us go to bed." They helped each other inside, their movements synchronized by decades of partnership. Their bedroom was on the ground floor now, the stairs to the second floor too difficult for their aging bodies. But the room was comfortable, filled with memories and photos and reminders of their shared life. That night, Owen held Delilah close as they drifted towards sleep, grateful for another day together, another sunset shared, another moment of connection in a lifetime filled with them. He died peacefully 3 weeks later, in his sleep with Delilah beside him. He was 79 years old and had lived to see 4 generations of his family thrive on the land he and Delilah had built together. His last conscious thought was of her, as it had been so many nights before, and he left the world without fear because he had loved and been loved in return. Delilah mourned him deeply, but without bitterness. They had been granted 46 years together, far more than many couples received. She lived another 3 years, surrounded by family, telling stories about Owen to great-grandchildren who had never known him. She spoke of his kindness, his strength, his initial fear of love and his eventual embrace of it. She made sure they understood that the life they all enjoyed had been built by 2 people who chose each other against the odds and never regretted that choice. She died in her sleep in the summer of 1924, at the age of 75, in the same bed where Owen had passed. Her children found her in the morning, peaceful and still, a slight smile on her face as if she had been dreaming of something wonderful. They buried her beside Owen on the hillside overlooking the valley, the same hillside where he had proposed half a century earlier. The entire family gathered for the funeral, a testament to the legacy 2 brave people had created. As they stood around the graves, James told his children and grandchildren the story one more time. The story of how a lonely cowboy who believed tomorrow meant alone met a determined young woman who showed him that alone could become together, and together could become everything. The ranch continued, passing through generations of hearts who all knew the story of Owen and Delilah, who understood that the land they worked and loved had been won not through conquest but through courage, the courage to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, tomorrow over yesterday. And in the evenings, when the sun set over the mountains and painted the sky in gold and crimson, anyone standing on that hillside might feel the presence of 2 people who had loved fiercely and built well, whose choice to walk through life together had echoed through time and created something that would outlast them both. Alone had become together beside her, and together had become a legacy that would never die.